The summer sun blazed down on Sunset Beach as Maya Chen stepped out of a rental car, her athletic frame casting a long shadow on the hot asphalt. At 24, she had earned this vacation through blood, sweat, and countless hours of intensive training that had pushed her body and mind to their absolute limits. What was supposed to be a peaceful week of recovery and relaxation would soon become something she never could have anticipated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had just completed the most grueling phase of her military contractor training, a program so intense that only 15% of candidates made it through to the end. For 6 months, she had lived and breathed combat techniques, strategic thinking, weapons training, and psychological warfare tactics. Her instructors had been former Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon operators, and international security specialists who had seen action in conflicts around the globe. They had transformed her from a determined college graduate with a degree in international relations into something far more dangerous. The training facility, hidden deep in the mountains of Colorado, had been her world for half a year. Every morning began at 4:30 with a 5-mile run through terrain that would challenge even experienced hikers. The altitude made every breath a struggle, but Maya had learned to push through the burning in her lungs and the ache in her muscles. Physical conditioning was just the foundation. Hand-to-hand combat training followed, where she learned techniques from multiple martial arts disciplines, focusing on efficiency and lethality rather than sport or tradition. Her instructors had been impressed with her natural aptitude for combat sports. Maya had been a competitive swimmer in college, which gave her exceptional body awareness and breath control. But what truly set her apart was her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. While other trainees panicked during stress exercises, Maya's heart rate would actually slow down, her thinking becoming more focused and precise. The weapons training had been equally intensive. She had mastered pistols, rifles, and shotguns, learning not just marksmanship, but tactical reloading, malfunction clearing, and combat shooting under stress. More importantly, she had learned to improvise weapons from everyday objects, a skill that her instructors insisted could save her life in situations where conventional weapons weren't available. But perhaps the most valuable part of her training had been the psychological component. She had learned to read people, to identify threats before they materialize, and to project different personas depending on the situation. Her instructors had taught her that the best operators were often invisible, able to blend into any environment and assess situations without drawing attention to themselves. Now, as she grabbed her beach bag from the trunk of a rental car, Maya felt the familiar weight of hypervigilance that had become second nature during her training. Even on vacation, her eyes automatically swept the parking lot, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. It was a habit that might never fully fade, but one that had kept countless operators alive in hostile environments around the world. The beach was moderately crowded for a Thursday afternoon. Families with young children had claimed spots near the lifeguard stations, while college-age groups had gathered further down the shoreline where the music could be louder and the atmosphere more relaxed. Maya chose a spot roughly halfway between the two areas, close enough to the family section for safety, but far enough away to avoid the chaos of small children. As she spread out her towel and set up her beach chair, Maya couldn't help but notice the group of 5 young men who had positioned themselves about 50 yards down the beach. They appeared to be in their early 20s, athletic builds suggesting they were likely college athletes or recent graduates. They were loud, boisterous, and clearly had been drinking despite the posted regulations against alcohol on the beach. Her training kicked in automatically, cataloging details without conscious thought. The apparent leader was tall, probably 6'2", with the broad shoulders and thick neck of a football player. His blonde hair was cut short and he wore expensive sunglasses and swim trunks that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. The others seemed to orbit around him, laughing too loudly at his jokes and jumping to fulfill his requests for drinks or snacks. Maya recognized the dynamic immediately. It was a pack mentality, with one alpha male commanding the loyalty of his subordinates through a combination of charisma, social status, and probably financial influence. She had seen similar groups during her training exercises that simulated real-world scenarios. Such groups could be unpredictable, especially when alcohol was involved, and when they felt their social dominance was being challenged, or when they identified a potential victim. For now, though, they seemed content to stay in their own area, playing loud music and engaging in increasingly reckless behavior as they consumed more alcohol. Maya made a mental note to keep an eye on them while enjoying her first real relaxation time in 6 months. She had booked this vacation as a reward for completing her training and as a way to decompress before starting her new position with Aegis International, one of the most prestigious private security firms in the world. Her assignment would take her to various hotspots around the globe, protecting high-value clients who faced legitimate threats to their safety. The pay was exceptional, but the risks were real. As she settled into her chair with a book about geopolitical strategies in Southeast Asia, Maya allowed herself a small smile. The warm sun felt incredible against her skin, which had grown pale during the months of training in underground facilities and mountain environments where sunlight was a rare commodity. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was a welcome change from the constant noise of gunfire, explosions, and shouting that had filled her days at the training facility.
The afternoon progressed peacefully for the first 2 hours. Maya alternated between reading and taking refreshing dips in the ocean, enjoying the feeling of salt water against her skin and the gentle resistance of the waves. Her swimmer's instincts clicked in automatically as she moved through the water with efficient strokes, her muscle memory from years of competitive swimming still intact despite the months focused on combat training. During her training, there had been extensive water-based exercises. Her instructors had made it clear that many military and security operations took place near or in water, and operatives needed to be as comfortable in aquatic environments as they were on land. Maya had excelled in these exercises, her swimming background giving her a significant advantage over other trainees who struggled with the physical demands of treading water while fully clothed or swimming long distances in simulated combat conditions. As she returned from her third swim of the day, Maya noticed that the group of young men had grown more intoxicated and increasingly loud. Their behavior was becoming more aggressive, with playful wrestling matches that seemed to have an edge of genuine violence. The alpha male, whom she had mentally dubbed Brad, based on his stereotypical appearance and behavior, was becoming particularly boisterous. Brad had noticed her earlier, she was certain of that. During her training, Maya had learned to recognize the feeling of being watched, and her instincts had been sending subtle warning signals for the past hour. Every time she looked in their direction, at least one member of the group was staring at her, and their conversations seemed to include gestures in her direction. Maya's training had included extensive education about predator behavior and pack dynamics. She knew that groups of intoxicated young men, particularly those with established hierarchies and a sense of entitlement, could pose significant threats to women who appeared to be alone and vulnerable. The statistics were sobering, and her instructors had made it clear that awareness and preparation were the best defenses against such situations. She also knew that her appearance might make her seem like an easy target to someone who didn't know better. At 5'6" with a lean swimmer's build, Maya didn't look particularly intimidating. Her Asian features and quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate her, something that had actually worked to her advantage during training exercises. Opponents would approach her with confidence, only to find themselves on the ground seconds later, confused about how someone so small had overpowered them so quickly. Her hand-to-hand combat instructors had been particularly impressed with her ability to use an opponent's assumptions against them. "You have a natural gift for making people underestimate you," Sergeant Rodriguez had told her after she had successfully taken down a trainee who outweighed her by 80 pounds. "That's going to keep you alive someday." Maya decided to test her instincts about the group's intentions. She stood up from her chair and walked toward the parking lot, moving slowly and deliberately as if she were going to her car for something. Sure enough, she noticed Brad saying something to his friends, and two of them began moving in her direction, trying to appear casual but clearly positioning themselves to intercept her path. She changed course and walked toward the beach's snack bar instead, a location that was well populated and had security cameras. The two young men hesitated, clearly unsure whether to follow her into the more crowded area. After a moment of apparent confusion, they returned to their group, where Maya could see Brad gesturing animatedly and appearing frustrated. This confirmed her suspicions. The group was definitely focused on her, and they were beginning to coordinate their movements. In her training, this type of behavior had been identified as a clear precursor to an attempted assault or abduction. Predators often worked in groups to isolate targets, using multiple people to create confusion and overwhelm their victims. Maya purchased a bottle of water she didn't need and used the opportunity to scan the beach more thoroughly. She identified several potential escape routes, cataloged the locations of families with children who might call for help, and noted the position of the lifeguard stations. Most importantly, she observed that the group of young men had positioned themselves between her chair and the most direct path to the parking lot. During her training, one of the most important lessons had been about the importance of maintaining situational awareness and having multiple contingency plans. Never let yourself be backed into a corner, her tactical instructor had repeated countless times. Always know where your exits are and always have a backup plan for your backup plan. Maya returned to her chair, but now her relaxation was gone. Every muscle in her body was subtly tense, ready to react at a moment's notice. She continued reading her book, but her eyes were constantly moving, tracking the movements of Brad's group and assessing the changing dynamics on the beach. The group was becoming more brazen in their attention. Brad was now openly staring at her, making comments to his friends that caused them to laugh and look in her direction. She could see them passing around what appeared to be a flask, further increasing their intoxication levels. The combination of alcohol, pack dynamics, and what they perceived to be an isolated target was creating a dangerous situation.
Maya considered her options. She could pack up and leave immediately, which would be the safest course of action. But something about the group's behavior suggested that they might follow her to the parking lot, where she would be even more isolated. She could approach the lifeguards or other beachgoers for help, but that might escalate the situation unnecessarily if she was misreading their intentions. Her training had taught her that sometimes the best defense was to make yourself appear to be a harder target than originally assessed. She decided to engage in some subtle behavioral modifications that might cause the group to reconsider their apparent plans. Maya stood up and began a series of stretching exercises that showcased her athletic build and flexibility. To a casual observer, it would appear that she was simply preparing for another swim or working out minor kinks from lying in the sun. But to anyone with combat experience, the movements would be recognizable as part of a martial arts warm-up routine. She moved through a series of kicks, punches, and grappling movements disguised as stretches, each motion precise and controlled in a way that suggested extensive training. Her balance was perfect, her form textbook, and her transitions between movements flowed like a choreographed dance. The effect on Brad's group was immediate and noticeable. The casual laughter died down, and she could see them exchanging uncertain glances. Brad himself seemed less confident, his posture changing from predatory swagger to something more cautious. But Maya's relief was short-lived. Instead of deterring the group, her display seemed to have the opposite effect on Brad. She could see his expression changing from uncertainty back to determination, but now with an added element that made her blood run cold. He was smiling, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had just been presented with a challenge that he found exciting.
Brad said something to his companions that made them all turn to look at Maya with renewed interest. The dynamic had shifted again, and she realized with growing concern that her attempt to deter them had instead intrigued them. During her psychological training, she had learned about a particular type of predator who was actually attracted to victims who appeared capable of fighting back. For these individuals, the prospect of overcoming someone with training was part of the thrill. Maya's mind raced through her tactical options. The beach was still populated, but most of the families with children had begun packing up as the afternoon wore on. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, and she realized that she had been at the beach longer than she had intended. The changing light conditions would work against her if a confrontation became inevitable. She made a decision that would have seemed counterintuitive to most people, but made perfect sense given her training. Instead of trying to avoid the group or appear non-threatening, Maya decided to project strength and confidence while positioning herself strategically for whatever might come next. She walked down to the water's edge, moving with the fluid grace that had been drilled into her during months of combat training. Every step was deliberate, her posture erect but relaxed, her eyes constantly scanning her environment. To anyone watching, she appeared to be simply enjoying a leisurely walk along the surf line, but she was actually conducting a tactical assessment of the terrain. The wet sand near the water would provide better footing for combat movements, reducing the risk of slipping during rapid directional changes. The incoming waves would mask sounds and potentially create opportunities for misdirection. Most importantly, the water itself represented both an escape route and a tactical advantage given her superior swimming abilities. Brad and his group were watching her every movement now, no longer making any pretense of casual interest. Maya could see them gathering their belongings, and it became clear that they were preparing to approach her. The pack dynamics were becoming more pronounced, with the 4 subordinate members looking to Brad for leadership while positioning themselves to support whatever action he decided to take. During her training, Maya had participated in numerous exercises designed to simulate exactly this type of scenario: multiple attackers, unpredictable environment, civilians in the area who might be endangered by any violent confrontation. The key was to maintain control of the situation while avoiding escalation if possible, but being prepared for immediate and decisive action if de-escalation failed. As she walked along the water's edge, Maya mentally reviewed the combat techniques that would be most effective against multiple opponents in this environment. Her instructors had emphasized that fighting multiple attackers was fundamentally different from one-on-one combat. The key was to use speed, positioning, and the opponent's own momentum against them, while preventing them from coordinating their attacks effectively. The group was moving now, walking in her direction with what appeared to be casual intent, but with a formation that suggested coordination. Brad was in the lead, with 2 of his companions flanking him at a slight distance. The other 2 were hanging back, positioning themselves to cut off potential escape routes. Maya's heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled and deep. This was exactly the type of situation her training had prepared her for, and she felt a familiar sense of calm focus settling over her mind. The months of stress conditioning and scenario-based training were paying off, allowing her to think clearly and assess the situation objectively despite the obvious danger.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She continued her walk, allowing the group to close the distance while she selected the optimal location for a potential confrontation. Maya wanted terrain that would give her advantages while limiting theirs, somewhere with multiple escape routes, but also sufficient space to maneuver without endangering innocent bystanders. About 100 yards ahead, she spotted the perfect location. A small outcropping of rocks extended into the water, creating a natural barrier on one side while leaving multiple directions for tactical movement. The area was far enough from the main beach crowds to prevent civilian casualties, but close enough that her actions would be visible to potential witnesses. As she approached the rocks, Maya could hear the group behind her picking up their pace. Their earlier attempts at appearing casual were abandoned now, and she could hear Brad's voice carrying over the sound of the waves, though she couldn't make out the specific words. The tone was predatory, confident, and excited in a way that confirmed her worst fears about their intentions. Maya reached the rocks and turned to face the approaching group, her back to the water but with clear paths to either side. She adopted a stance that appeared relaxed, but was actually a classical combat position that would allow her to move instantly in any direction. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, but her fingers were positioned for immediate deployment of the striking techniques she had practiced thousands of times. Brad and his companions slowed as they approached, spreading out in a loose semicircle that confirmed their intent to surround her. The leader's confidence was evident in his swagger, But Maya could see uncertainty in the eyes of some of his followers. This was good. Uncertainty could be exploited, and not all of them seemed fully committed to whatever Brad had planned. "Hey there, beautiful," Brad called out when they were about 20 feet away, his voice carrying the artificial friendliness that predators often use to disarm their victims. "We noticed you've been here all alone, and we thought maybe you'd like some company. We're having a party back at our spot, and we'd love for you to join us." Maya didn't respond immediately, using the silence to complete her assessment of each individual threat. Brad was clearly the primary danger, confident, intoxicated, and committed to his course of action. The two flanking him appeared to be followers who would take their cues from his behavior. One of them kept shifting his weight nervously, suggesting he might be having second thoughts. The two who had positioned themselves to block escape routes were the wild cards. She would need to neutralize them quickly if violence became necessary. "That's very kind of you," Maya replied, her voice calm and steady, "but I prefer to enjoy the beach alone. I'm sure you can understand that." Her response was carefully calculated, polite enough to avoid seeming confrontational, but firm enough to establish clear boundaries. During her training, she had learned that how you responded to initial contact often determined how a situation would develop. Appearing too aggressive could escalate unnecessarily, but appearing too passive could encourage further predatory behavior. Brad's smile widened, but there was nothing pleasant about the expression. "Come on now, don't be antisocial. We're all friendly guys and we just want to get to know you better. Besides, it's not safe for a pretty girl like you to be out here all alone as it gets dark." The implied threat was clear, and Maya felt her body's sympathetic nervous system beginning to prepare for combat. Adrenaline started flowing through her system, sharpening her focus and preparing her muscles for explosive action. But her training had taught her to channel this physiological response, rather than be controlled by it. "I appreciate your concern," Maya said, taking a small step backward that positioned her more favorably for defensive action. "But I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I think it would be best if you returned to your friends and left me to enjoy my evening."
The refusal clearly frustrated Brad, and Maya could see his demeanor shifting from fake friendliness to something more openly aggressive. This was the critical moment, the point where the situation would either de-escalate or explode into violence. Everything depended on how Brad chose to respond to her clear rejection of his advances. Brad's expression darkened at Maya's firm rejection, and the pretense of friendliness completely evaporated from his voice. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, taking several steps closer while his companions began tightening their formation around her. "I don't think you understand the situation here. We're trying to be nice, but there are 5 of us and 1 of you. Maybe you should reconsider our generous invitation." Maya's training kicked into high gear as the threat became explicit. Her instructors had spent countless hours teaching her to recognize the exact moment when a situation transitioned from potentially dangerous to actively hostile. Brad's body language, tone of voice, and the coordinated movement of his group left no doubt about their intentions. This was no longer about social interaction or even aggressive flirting. This was a coordinated attack in progress. "I understand the situation perfectly," Maya replied, her voice remaining calm despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. "The question is whether you understand it." Her response confused Brad momentarily, which was exactly what she intended. During psychological warfare training, Maya had learned that unexpected responses could disrupt an aggressor's mental script and create opportunities for tactical advantage. Predators relied on predictable victim responses: fear, pleading, submission. When those responses didn't materialize, it often caused hesitation that could be exploited. One of Brad's companions, a stocky young man with a baseball cap worn backward, laughed nervously. "Dude, maybe she's not worth the trouble. There are other girls on the beach." Brad whirled on his friend with sudden fury. "Shut up, Tyler! Nobody asked for your opinion." He turned back to Maya, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "You think you're better than us? You think you're too good for our company? We'll see about that. Maya recognized the escalation pattern immediately. Brad's leadership of the group depended on his ability to project dominance and control. Maya's refusal to be intimidated was undermining that dominance in front of his followers, forcing him to escalate to maintain his position as alpha. This psychological dynamic made him more dangerous, but also more predictable. The 5 young men were now positioned in a loose circle around Maya, with the rocks behind her and the ocean to her left. Under normal circumstances, this would be an extremely disadvantageous position, surrounded with limited escape routes. But Maya's training had taught her to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. The rocks behind her provided elevation and cover if needed. The ocean offered escape routes that her superior swimming skills made viable. Most importantly, the formation her opponents had chosen was actually tactically flawed for group combat. They were too close together, which would interfere with each other's movements, and they had positioned themselves where Maya could potentially force them to collide with each other during any physical altercation. "Last chance, princess," Brad snarled, now less than 10 feet away. "Come with us nicely, or we'll have to get creative about convincing you." Maya made her decision. De-escalation was no longer possible, and waiting any longer would only allow her opponents to improve their positioning or potentially draw weapons. Her instructors had drilled into her the critical importance of acting decisively once violence became inevitable. "I tried to be polite," Maya said, her stance shifting almost imperceptibly as she prepared for action. "But you clearly don't understand simple communication." What happened next would have been invisible to most observers, but Maya's months of intensive training had honed her ability to read micro-expressions and body language cues. Brad's weight shifted slightly forward onto his toes, his shoulders tensioned, and his right hand began to move, all indicators that he was about to lunge forward and attempt to grab her. Maya moved first. Her initial action wasn't an attack, but a tactical repositioning that took advantage of the terrain and her opponent's poor formation. She dove forward and to the right in a controlled roll that took her past Brad's reaching hands and positioned her behind Tyler, the nervous follower who had suggested they leave her alone. The movement was so fast and unexpected that for a crucial moment, all 5 young men were confused about where she had gone. Maya used this confusion to execute the first phase of her counterattack strategy. Rising from her role directly behind Tyler, Maya wrapped her right arm around his throat in a rear naked choke while simultaneously sweeping his legs with her left foot. The technique was one she had practiced thousands of times during her training, and Tyler's alcohol-impaired reflexes were no match for her speed and precision. Tyler went down hard, his head striking the sand with enough force to leave him dazed and disoriented, but not seriously injured. Maya maintained the chokehold just long enough to render him unconscious, approximately 8 seconds, before releasing him and immediately transitioning to address the next threat. Brad and his remaining 3 companions were still processing what had happened when Maya engaged her second target. She had identified him earlier as one of the 2 who had positioned themselves to block escape routes, a tall, thin young man with a fraternity t-shirt who appeared to be the most athletic of the group after Brad. Maya's approach was classic military close-quarters combat, fast, brutal, and designed to incapacitate rather than engage in extended fighting. She drove her knee into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over, then brought her elbow down on the back of his neck in a controlled strike that sent him to his knees gasping for breath. The entire sequence from her initial movement to neutralizing 2 opponents had taken less than 15 seconds, but to Maya it felt like slow motion. Her training had conditioned her to process information and make decisions at accelerated speeds during combat situations. Every movement was calculated, every strike precise, and every positioning choice designed to maintain tactical advantage. Brad was screaming now, his earlier confidence replaced by rage and disbelief. "What the hell is wrong with you? We were just trying to be friendly."
Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of his statement. Even now, with two of his companions down and the situation completely reversed, Brad was still trying to maintain the fiction that their intentions had been innocent. It was a classic predator behavior pattern: deny, minimize, and blame the victim even when caught in the act. "Your definition of friendly needs work," Maya replied, positioning herself so that the remaining three opponents couldn't coordinate their attacks effectively. She was now using Tyler's unconscious body as partial cover, while keeping the other two neutralized targets between herself and Brad's remaining allies. The psychological impact of her counterattack was evident in the remaining three young men. What had started as a confident group assault on what they perceived as an easy victim had become a nightmare scenario where they were outmatched and outfought by someone they had dramatically underestimated. Brad's remaining companions were showing clear signs of wanting to disengage. One of them, a short, stocky young man with bleached hair, was backing away slowly with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The other, tall with dark hair and wearing an expensive watch, was looking around frantically as if searching for help or an escape route. But Brad himself was past the point of rational decision-making. His ego, his social status among his peers, and his fundamental worldview had all been shattered by Maya's resistance. The alcohol in his system was impairing his judgment, but more importantly, his psychological need to dominate the situation was overriding his survival instincts. "You psychotic bitch!" Brad screamed, pulling something from his pocket. Maya's heart rate spiked as she recognized the outline of a knife, a folding blade that Brad was fumbling to open with hands shaking from adrenaline and alcohol. The introduction of a weapon changed everything. Maya's training had covered knife defense extensively, but her instructors had been clear about the realities of edged weapon encounters. Even highly trained individuals could be seriously injured or killed by an amateur with a knife if they made mistakes or became overconfident. Maya's mind instantly shifted into weapon defense mode, her positioning and movement patterns adapting to account for the blade's reach and the unpredictable slashing patterns of an untrained opponent. Brad's drunken state would make him more dangerous in some ways, more unpredictable and less likely to respond to pain or submission holds, but also more vulnerable to techniques that exploited his impaired balance and coordination. "Brad, man, let's just get out of here," the stocky blonde young man pleaded, his voice high with panic. "This is getting way out of hand." "Shut up," Brad snarled, finally getting the knife blade locked open. "Nobody disrespects me like this. Nobody!" Maya could see that Brad had moved beyond rational thought into a psychological state that her instructors had warned her about, a combination of wounded pride, alcohol impairment, and primal aggression that made him extremely dangerous despite his lack of training. This was no longer about assault or intimidation. Brad was now motivated by a need to inflict serious harm to restore his damaged ego.
Maya's tactical assessment shifted immediately with the introduction of the knife. Her training had covered edged weapon defense extensively, but her instructors had always emphasized that knife fights were among the most dangerous encounters an operator could face. "Nobody wins a knife fight," Sergeant Rodriguez had told her class repeatedly. "Some people just lose less than others." The blade in Brad's hand was approximately 4 inches long, not particularly large, but more than enough to cause fatal wounds if he managed to connect with vital areas. Maya could see that he held it incorrectly, gripping it like a hammer rather than using proper knife fighting techniques, but that actually made him more unpredictable and potentially more dangerous. "Last warning," Maya called out from the beach, her voice carrying across the beach with enough volume to attract attention from other beachgoers. "Drop the weapon and walk away. This doesn't have to go any further." She was hoping that the publicity of her loud warning might cause Brad to reconsider or at least alert potential witnesses to call for help. During her training, she had learned that predators typically preferred to operate without witnesses, and drawing attention to the situation might cause him to disengage. But Brad was beyond such rational considerations. "You're going to pay for embarrassing me," he growled, beginning to advance with the knife held out in front of him in a clumsy, threatening gesture. "You're going to learn some respect." Maya's remaining options were now limited and time-sensitive. She could attempt to flee by diving into the ocean, relying on her superior swimming skills to escape. But that would leave Brad and his remaining companions free to potentially target other women on the beach. And Maya's sense of responsibility wouldn't allow her to simply run from the confrontation. She could try to maintain distance and wait for help to arrive, but there was no guarantee that anyone had noticed the situation or called the authorities. The beach was less crowded now as evening approached, and the sound of waves might have masked her earlier warning shout. The third option was to end the threat decisively, using lethal force techniques from her training. Maya had been certified in methods designed to kill or permanently incapacitate armed opponents, but using such techniques against a drunk college student with a small knife would be difficult to justify legally, even in self-defense. Maya chose a fourth option that drew on some of the most advanced training she had received: disarming techniques specifically designed for knife-wielding opponents who lacked formal combat training. As Brad lurched forward with an overhand slashing motion that telegraphed his intentions from several feet away, Maya executed a technique that her instructors had called redirection and control. Instead of trying to block the knife directly or retreat from it, she moved forward and to the side, using Brad's own momentum against him. Her left hand caught his wrist just above the knife, controlling the weapon's direction, while her right elbow drove into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over. The impact drove the air from his lungs and caused him to reflexively loosen his grip on the knife handle. Maya's follow-up was immediate and decisive. She twisted Brad's wrist in a direction that human joints weren't designed to accommodate, applying pressure that caused him to release the knife involuntarily while driving him to his knees in the sand. The entire disarmament sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The knife flew several feet away, landing harmlessly in the sand near the water's edge. Brad was gasping for breath and clutching his wrist, which Maya had been careful not to break despite applying enough pressure to ensure compliance. The psychological effect on Brad's remaining 2 companions was immediate and profound. They had just witnessed their leader, the person they looked to for dominance and confidence, reduced to a gasping, defeated figure kneeling in the sand. The entire power dynamic that had defined their group was shattered. "We're out of here," the tall young man with the expensive watch declared, backing away rapidly. "This is insane. We never signed up for this." The stocky blonde nodded frantically in agreement. "Yeah, man, we're gone. Brad, you're on your own with this psycho." Maya almost smiled at being called a psycho by someone who had been part of a group attempting to assault a lone woman on the beach, but she maintained her focus on Brad, who was still the primary threat despite being temporarily disabled. "Smart choice," Maya called out after the retreating pair. "And gentlemen, if I see you approaching any other women on this beach or any other beach, we're going to have a much more serious conversation." The 2 young men didn't respond, but their pace quickened as they headed back toward the main beach area, where they began gathering their belongings with obvious haste. Maya could see them gesturing animatedly as they packed, probably debating whether to call the police themselves or simply flee the scene entirely. Brad was starting to recover his breath, and Maya could see anger replacing the shock in his eyes. She had been hoping that the decisive nature of her counterattack might convince him to disengage, but his psychological profile suggested that he was the type of person who would escalate rather than accept defeat. "You broke my wrist," Brad gasped, struggling to his feet while cradling his injured hand. "No, I didn't," Maya replied calmly. "If I had broken your wrist, you'd be in shock from the pain and unable to move your fingers. I applied a compliance hold that caused temporary discomfort. There's a significant difference." Her clinical assessment of his injury was accurate. Maya had been trained to know exactly how much pressure to apply to achieve compliance without causing permanent damage. Brad's wrist was probably sprained and would be sore for several days, but no bones were broken and no tendons were torn. Maya glanced at Tyler and the thin young man she had neutralized earlier. Tyler was beginning to regain consciousness, his eyes fluttering as he tried to process what had happened. The other was sitting up slowly, still gasping from the solar plexus strike, but apparently not seriously injured. "Here's what's going to happen," Maya said, addressing all three remaining members of the group. "You're going to collect your things, leave this beach, and never approach another woman the way you approached me. This is your one and only warning." Brad's face was flushed with rage and embarrassment, but Maya could see that he was finally beginning to process the reality of his situation. He was injured, his companions had abandoned him, and he was facing someone who had demonstrated superior fighting skills and tactical thinking. "You can't just attack people," Brad muttered, but his voice lacked the confidence he had displayed earlier. "You're absolutely right," Maya agreed, "which is why what you and your friends attempted to do to me was not only criminal, but morally reprehensible. You surrounded an isolated woman with the clear intent to intimidate and assault her. Everything I did was in self-defense against a credible threat." Maya's analysis was legally sound as well as tactically accurate. Any investigation would show that Brad and his companions had approached her in a coordinated fashion, made verbal threats, surrounded her in an isolated location, and ultimately produced a weapon. Her response had been measured and appropriate to the threat level. Tyler was now sitting up, looking around in confusion at the scene. When his eyes focused on Maya, she could see recognition and fear replacing the earlier predatory confidence he had displayed as part of the group. "What happened to me?" Tyler asked, his voice slurred from the brief unconsciousness. "You experienced a brief interruption in blood flow to your brain," Maya explained matter-of-factly. "It's a non-lethal technique designed to temporarily incapacitate without causing permanent damage. You'll have a headache and feel disoriented for a few minutes, but there shouldn't be any lasting effects." The clinical way Maya described the technique seemed to unnerve all three young men more than threats or anger would have. It demonstrated that her actions had been calculated and controlled rather than reactive, suggesting a level of training and preparation that they were clearly unprepared to deal with. Brad was still holding his wrist, but Maya could see him looking around for the knife that had been knocked away during their brief struggle. His persistence in seeking to continue the confrontation despite being clearly outmatched was concerning, but not surprising given his psychological profile. "Don't even think about it," Maya warned, having followed his gaze to the knife lying in the sand. "The next time you threaten me with a weapon, I'll assume you intend to use it, and I'll respond accordingly. Trust me, you don't want that." The implications of her statement were clear to everyone present. Maya had demonstrated restraint in her initial response, using techniques designed to control and neutralize rather than seriously injure. But she was also making it clear that further escalation on Brad's part would be met with a much more decisive and potentially lethal response. As the confrontation continued to develop, Maya became aware that the situation had attracted attention from other beachgoers. She could see several people in the distance pointing in their direction and talking animatedly among themselves. Some appeared to be using cell phones, possibly calling the authorities or recording video of the encounter. This attention was both good and bad for Maya's situation. On the positive side, witnesses would corroborate her version of events and confirm that she had acted in self-defense against multiple attackers. The presence of observers might also discourage Brad from making any further aggressive moves. On the negative side, Maya's training and response capabilities were now on display for anyone with a camera phone. Her techniques and fighting skills could potentially be analyzed and circulated online, which might compromise her effectiveness in future security operations. More immediately, the attention might also bring police intervention before she had fully resolved the situation with Brad and his companions. Tyler was struggling to his feet, still unsteady from the effects of the chokehold. Maya kept part of her attention on him while maintaining primary focus on Brad, who remained the most significant threat. The thin young man she had struck was now standing as well, rubbing his neck but seeming more interested in leaving than continuing any confrontation. "Look, lady," Tyler said, his voice still shaky. I don't know what training you have, but this is getting way out of hand. Can't we all just walk away from this? Maya appreciated Tyler's attempt at de-escalation, but she knew that the decision wasn't entirely hers to make. Brad's psychological state and his apparent inability to accept defeat meant that simply walking away might not be an option, regardless of what she preferred. I would have been happy to walk away 20 minutes ago, Maya replied, keeping her eyes on Brad while addressing Tyler. Your friend chose to escalate this situation multiple times, including producing a weapon. Walking away is still possible, but it requires everyone to make that choice. Brad was slowly reaching toward the knife again, his movements hesitant but persistent. Maya realized that his alcohol-impaired judgment and wounded pride were going to force her to take more decisive action to end the confrontation permanently. "Brad, stop!" the thin young man pleaded. "Let's just go! This isn't worth it!" "Shut up, Marcus," Brad snarled without taking his eyes off Maya. "You don't understand what this is about. This is about respect." Maya's training had covered the psychological dynamics of masculine aggression extensively. Brad's behavior was a textbook example of how some men responded to perceived challenges to their dominance, particularly when those challenges came from women. His rational mind might understand that continuing the confrontation was foolish, but his emotional response was overriding logic. "This isn't about respect," Maya said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of authority that her instructors had taught her to project in crisis situations. Her psychological assessment was designed to further undermine Brad's confidence, while potentially reaching whatever rational thought processes remained functional despite his intoxication. Sometimes forcing someone to confront the reality of their behavior could break through the emotional barriers that prevented de-escalation. Brad's response confirmed Maya's assessment that he was beyond reasonable discourse. Instead of considering her words, he lunged for the knife with a desperate scrambling motion that left him off balance and vulnerable. Maya moved to intercept him, but this time her approach was different. She had given Brad multiple opportunities to disengage, and he had chosen to continue escalating despite clear demonstrations of her superior capabilities. Her instructors had taught her that there came a point in any confrontation where further restraint became dangerous to everyone involved.
Maya's technique this time was designed to end the confrontation definitively. As Brad reached for the knife, she drove her knee into his ribs with enough force to crack bone, then followed up with an elbow strike to the side of his head that sent him sprawling, unconscious into the sand. The violence was brief, calculated, and decisive. Brad would have several cracked ribs and a significant concussion, but nothing that would cause permanent damage or threaten his life. He would, however, be unconscious for several minutes and in no condition to continue fighting when he woke up. Tyler and Marcus stared in shock at their leader's motionless form. The reality of the situation was finally penetrating their alcohol-impaired thinking. They had attempted to assault someone with professional combat training, and they were completely outmatched. "Is he dead?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Maya replied, kneeling to check Brad's pulse and breathing. "He's unconscious with probable broken ribs and a concussion. He'll need medical attention, but he'll recover fully." Maya's clinical assessment was accurate, but she was also making sure that her actions were witnessed and recorded by the growing number of observers. Any investigation would show that she had used appropriate force to defend herself against multiple attackers, one of whom had been armed with a knife. In the distance, Maya could see two people approaching rapidly across the sand. Their purposeful stride and coordinated movement suggested either off-duty police officers or possibly other military/security personnel who had recognized the nature of the confrontation and were coming to assist. "Is everything all right over here?" the man called out as he approached. "It is now," Maya replied. "5 guys decided to surround me and make threats. The situation has been resolved." The woman reached them first, her eyes quickly scanning the scene and taking in the details, the knife in the sand, the footprints and scuff marks indicating a struggle, and Maya's composed but alert posture. "Former military?"
the woman asked.
Private contractor. Just finished training. The man nodded with understanding. We saw most of it from up the beach. Textbook self-defense. Clean techniques, appropriate force escalation, minimal collateral damage. Your instructors would be proud. Maya felt a surge of relief at having her actions validated by other professionals. During her training, she had been taught that the psychological aftermath of violent encounters could be as challenging as the physical confrontation itself, and having experienced observers confirm that her response had been appropriate was enormously helpful. "Were you concerned about the weapons escalation?" the woman asked, nodding toward the knife. Briefly, Maya admitted. He was untrained and intoxicated, which made him unpredictable, but the disarmament was straightforward once I committed to engaging. The three of them watched as Tyler and Marcus finally managed to get Brad upright and began half-carrying, half-dragging him toward the parking lot. Other beachgoers were giving the group a wide berth, clearly wanting no part of whatever drama had unfolded. Maya realized that the confrontation was truly over. Brad was neutralized and being removed from the beach by his companions who had clearly learned that their usual tactics for intimidating women weren't universally effective. The immediate threat was ended, and she had successfully defended herself without causing permanent injury to her attackers. But as the adrenaline began to fade from her system, Maya found herself processing the psychological implications of what had just occurred. This had been her first real-world application of her military contractor training, and it had unfolded almost exactly as her instructors had predicted it might. As Tyler and Marcus disappeared into the parking lot with Brad's unconscious form, Maya found herself in conversation with the two professionals who had witnessed the confrontation. The man introduced himself as Colonel James Patterson, retired Army Special Forces, while the woman was Elena Vasquez, a former Marine Corps martial arts instructor who now worked in executive protection. "We were having dinner at the beachside restaurant when we noticed the situation developing," Colonel Patterson explained. "Groups of young men surrounding isolated women is unfortunately a pattern we've both seen too many times, both overseas and here at home." Elena nodded in agreement. "Your situational awareness was excellent throughout the buildup. We could see you tracking their movements and positioning yourself advantageously long before they made their move. That kind of tactical thinking probably prevented a much worse outcome." Maya appreciated the professional assessment, but she was still processing the emotional impact of her first real-world combat application. During training, even the most realistic scenarios had an element of simulation that made them psychologically different from facing genuine threats with genuine consequences. "The transition from training to real-world application is always jarring," Colonel Patterson observed, apparently reading her expression. "No matter how realistic the scenarios, there's something different about facing people who actually intend to harm you." "The psychological preparation helps," Maya replied, "but you're right about the transition. During training, part of your mind always knows it's an exercise. This felt different from the moment they started coordinating their approach." Elena asked about Maya's background in training, and Maya provided a brief overview of her 6-month program with the military contractor certification course. Both professionals were familiar with similar programs and asked knowledgeable questions about specific aspects of her curriculum. "The hand-to-hand combat techniques you used were very clean," Elena commented. "Your instructors clearly emphasized efficiency over flashiness. In a multiple opponent scenario like this, that kind of training probably saved your life." As they talked, Maya became aware that several other beachgoers were still watching from a distance, some apparently recording video with their phones. The incident had clearly been a significant disruption to what was normally a peaceful beach environment. "Should I be concerned about the recordings?" Maya asked. Colonel Patterson shrugged. "From what we observed, everything you did was clearly self-defense against multiple attackers, one of whom produced a weapon. Any reasonable analysis of those videos will support your version of events. If anything, having the documentation might protect you from any false claims they might make later." This was reassuring, but Maya realized that her involvement in such a public incident might have implications for her upcoming assignment with Aegis International. Private security firms valued operators who could handle threats effectively, but they also prefer to avoid publicity and legal complications. As if reading her thoughts, Elena asked about Maya's career plans. When Maya mentioned her upcoming position with Aegis, both professionals exchanged knowing looks.
"Aegis has an excellent reputation,"
Colonel Patterson said. They handle some very high-profile clients, and they don't hire people without exceptional qualifications. An incident like this, where you successfully defended yourself against multiple attackers while maintaining appropriate force levels and avoiding civilian casualties, is exactly the kind of real-world experience they value. Elena agreed. In fact, this kind of situation is probably more relevant to executive protection work than most training scenarios. You demonstrated tactical awareness, threat assessment, de-escalation attempts, appropriate force escalation, and professional restraint. Those are exactly the skills Aegis looks for in their operators. Their professional perspective was helping Maya process the incident in a more positive light. Instead of seeing it as a violent disruption of her vacation, she was beginning to understand it as a validation of her training and a demonstration of her readiness for her new career. The psychological aftermath is important to manage properly, Elena continued. Even in clear-cut self-defense situations, using violence against other people can have unexpected emotional consequences. Have you been trained in post-incident psychological processing? Maya confirmed that psychological resilience and post-incident management had been significant components of her training program. Her instructors had emphasized that mental health was just as important as physical skills for long-term success in high-risk professions. The adrenaline crash can be particularly challenging, Colonel Patterson warned. You're probably still running on combat chemicals right now, but in a few hours you might experience fatigue, emotional fluctuations, or even some delayed stress responses. That's completely normal and doesn't indicate any kind of weakness or failure. As they continued talking, Maya noticed that the beach was beginning to empty as the sun moved lower toward the horizon. The family groups had packed up and left, leaving mostly young adult couples and individual beachgoers like herself. The incident with Brad's group had clearly accelerated the departure of families with children, which was unfortunate but understandable. Maya realized that her peaceful vacation had been permanently altered by the confrontation. Even though the immediate threat was resolved, she would probably spend the remainder of her time at the beach processing the incident and its implications, rather than relaxing and recovering from her intensive training period. "Are you planning to report this to the local authorities?" Elena asked. Maya had been considering this question since the confrontation ended. Legally, she was probably obligated to report the incident, especially given the weapons involvement and the injuries she had inflicted on Brad. Practically, reporting might create complications that could affect her upcoming employment. "I think I have to," Maya replied, after considering the question. "Too many witnesses, too much documentation, and the injuries were significant enough to require medical treatment. If Brad and his friends report their version of events first, I want the authorities to have accurate information." Colonel Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's the right call. Proactive reporting demonstrates that you have nothing to hide and that you're taking responsibility for your actions, even in a justified self-defense situation." Elena offered to serve as a witness if needed, having observed most of the confrontation from the restaurant deck. Colonel Patterson made a similar offer, noting that his military background and experience with violent encounters might lend credibility to his testimony. Maya thanked them both for their support and for their professional perspective on the incident. Having experienced operators validate her actions and offer assistance was enormously helpful in processing what had happened. As the three of them walked back toward the main beach area, Maya found herself reflecting on the broader implications of the incident. She had spent 6 months preparing for a career in high-risk environments around the world, but her first real combat application occurred during what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation at a peaceful American beach. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it also reinforced something her instructors had emphasized repeatedly during training. Threats could emerge anywhere, at any time, and often from sources that appear non-threatening initially. The skills she had learned weren't just for overseas deployments or protecting VIPs in hostile environments. They were life skills that might prove necessary in any situation where predators identified her as a potential victim. Maya realized that the incident had marked a permanent transition in her life. She was no longer someone who had theoretical training in combat and self-defense. She was now someone who had successfully used those skills in a real-world, life-threatening situation. That experience would inform every future decision and every future threat assessment she made. As they reached the parking lot, Elena handed Maya a business card. "I run training seminars for women in high-risk professions. If you ever want to discuss the psychological aspects of transitioning from training to operational status, or if you need someone to talk through post-incident processing, please don't hesitate to call." Colonel Patterson also provided his contact information, noting that he served as an informal mentor for military veterans and contractors transitioning into private security work. Aegis is a good company, but the private sector can be challenging to navigate. If you ever need advice about client management, contract negotiations, or operational challenges, I'm happy to help. Maya was grateful for both offers. The private security industry is known for being insular and male-dominated, and having experienced professionals willing to provide mentorship and support could be invaluable as she began her career.
After exchanging contact information with Colonel Patterson and Elena, Maya made her way back to her rental car, her mind still processing the events of the afternoon. The parking lot was nearly empty now, with only a few vehicles remaining as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. As she loaded her beach gear into the trunk, Maya noticed a police cruiser pulling into the parking lot. Her heart rate spiked briefly before she reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong, and that police involvement was probably inevitable given the public nature of the incident and the injuries involved. The officer who emerged from the cruiser was a woman in her 40s, with the confident bearing of someone experienced in handling beach-related incidents. She looked around the parking lot, apparently searching for someone, before her eyes settled on Maya. "Excuse me, miss," the officer called out as she approached. "I'm Officer Sarah Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. We received several calls about an altercation on the beach involving a group of young men and a woman matching your description. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Maya had expected this moment and had mentally rehearsed her responses during her conversation with the two military professionals. Her training had included instruction on interacting with law enforcement after defensive incidents, emphasizing the importance of being cooperative while also protecting her legal interests. "Of course, Officer Martinez," Maya replied calmly. "I was involved in a self-defense situation earlier this afternoon when 5 young men surrounded me and made threats. I'd be happy to provide you with a full account of what happened." Officer Martinez pulled out a notebook and began taking down Maya's basic information: name, address, occupation, and reason for being at the beach. When Maya mentioned her background as a recently certified military contractor, the officer's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more professional and focused. "Can you walk me through what happened, starting from when you first became aware of the group?" Officer Martinez asked. Maya provided a detailed chronological account of the incident, from her initial observation of the group's behavior through the final confrontation and Brad's unconsciousness. She was careful to describe her attempts at de-escalation, the group's escalating behavior, and her tactical decision-making process throughout the encounter. Officer Martinez took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions about specific aspects of Maya's account. She seemed particularly interested in the weapons involvement and the techniques Maya had used to neutralize her attackers. "You mentioned that one of the subjects produced a knife. Can you describe the weapon and what happened to it?" Maya led the officer back toward the beach area where the confrontation had occurred. The knife was still lying in the sand where it had fallen during the disarmament sequence, and Officer Martinez carefully photographed it from multiple angles before securing it as evidence. "The subject, you said his name was Brad, produced this knife and threatened you with it?" the officer confirmed. "That's correct. He opened the folding blade and advanced on me with it after I had already neutralized 2 members of his group in self-defense. At that point, I considered him to be presenting a lethal threat and responded accordingly." Officer Martinez nodded as she continued documenting the scene. "And you said that 2 other witnesses observed the incident, a retired military officer and a former Marine instructor."
Maya provided the contact information for Colonel Patterson and Alana, noting that they had observed most of the confrontation from the restaurant deck and had approached afterward to offer assistance and professional perspective. I'll need to interview them as well, but their witness testimony will be valuable in establishing the facts of the incident. As they talked, Maya learned that Tyler and Marcus had indeed taken Brad to the local hospital emergency room, where his injuries had been treated and reported to the authorities as required by law. The hospital staff had been suspicious of the story the group provided about Brad's injuries occurring during a beach football accident, particularly given the nature and pattern of the trauma. The emergency room doctor who treated the subject noted that his injuries were consistent with martial arts techniques rather than sports-related trauma. Specifically, the rib fractures showed evidence of a precise knee strike, and the head injury was consistent with a controlled elbow blow rather than an accidental collision.
Maya was impressed by the medical professional's ability to analyze the injury patterns, but she wasn't surprised. Her instructors had warned that modern emergency medicine was sophisticated enough to identify the signatures of various combat techniques, particularly when the injuries were as precisely applied as Maya's had been. The subject's companions also provided somewhat contradictory accounts of how the injuries occurred. Officer Martinez continued. The stories didn't match each other or the physical evidence, which raised additional questions about what actually happened. Maya realized that Tyler and Marcus had probably panicked when questioned at the hospital and had provided inconsistent information that undermined their credibility. Their obvious intoxication and nervous behavior had likely made hospital staff and police even more suspicious of their account. "Are they facing any charges?" Maya asked. "That will depend on the district attorney's review of all the evidence," Officer Martinez replied. "But based on the witness statements we've collected and the physical evidence, it appears that you were the victim of an attempted assault by multiple subjects, one of whom was armed with a deadly weapon. Your response appears to have been justified self-defense." This was the outcome Maya had hoped for, but hadn't been entirely certain she would achieve. Sometimes legal systems struggled to understand situations where apparent victims turned out to be highly trained in combat techniques, and she had been concerned that her effectiveness in neutralizing the threats might work against her legally. Officer Martinez completed her scene documentation and evidence collection, then accompanied Maya back to the parking lot, where she finished taking Maya's formal statement. The entire process took nearly 2 hours, but the officer was thorough and professional throughout. "I want to commend you for your restraint during this incident," Officer Martinez said as she prepared to conclude the interview. "Based on the evidence and witness statements, it's clear that you used appropriate force to defend yourself against a serious threat, and you stopped as soon as the threat was neutralized. Many people with your training might have escalated further than necessary." Maya appreciated the recognition of her restraint, as it had been a conscious decision throughout the confrontation to use only the minimum force necessary to neutralize each threat. Her instructors had emphasized that excessive force, even in self-defense situations, could lead to legal complications and moral conflicts that might affect an operator's long-term psychological health. "What happens next in the legal process?" Maya asked. "I'll file my report with the prosecutor's office, and they'll review all the evidence to determine if any charges should be filed. Based on what I've documented today, I expect they'll conclude that your actions were justified self-defense. You might be called to testify if the subjects are charged with assault, but otherwise, you're free to continue your vacation." As Officer Martinez drove away, Maya found herself alone in the nearly empty parking lot as the sun began to set over the ocean. The afternoon that had started as peaceful relaxation had turned into a complex legal and tactical situation that would probably influence her career and her personal development for years to come. Maya realized that she was no longer the same person who had arrived at the beach that morning. The experience of successfully defending herself against multiple attackers in a real-world situation had fundamentally changed her understanding of her own capabilities and her place in the world. During her training, she had learned combat techniques and tactical thinking, but she had never fully understood how those skills would feel when applied against genuine threats with genuine intent to cause harm. The psychological reality of using violence, even in clear self-defense situations, was different from anything simulation could prepare her for. But Maya also felt a sense of validation and confidence that her training had not provided. She had faced a genuinely dangerous situation and had handled it professionally, effectively, and with appropriate restraint. The tactical decisions she had made under pressure had been sound, and the techniques she had applied had been precisely executed. As she drove back to her hotel, Maya realized that the incident would become a defining moment in her transition from student to professional operator. She had demonstrated to herself and to witnesses that she could apply her training effectively under real-world stress, which is exactly the kind of experience that would make her more valuable to Aegis International and more confident in her future assignments.
The hotel room felt different when Maya returned that evening. What had been a simple vacation retreat now seemed like a staging area for processing a significant life event. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her beach clothes, and tried to fully comprehend everything that had happened over the past few hours. Maya's phone had been buzzing intermittently during the drive back from the beach, and she now saw several missed calls and text messages from unknown numbers. As she scrolled through them, she realized that word of the incident was already spreading beyond the immediate witnesses and authorities. One message was from a local news reporter who had apparently heard about the incident from police scanner traffic. Another was from someone claiming to represent a social media influencer who wanted to interview her about female empowerment and self-defense. A third was from what appeared to be a martial arts school offering to provide her with free training, apparently not realizing that she had just demonstrated professional-level combat skills. Maya decided to ignore the media requests for now, focusing instead on processing the emotional and psychological aspects of the incident. Her training had prepared her for the possibility of post-incident stress reactions, and she wanted to monitor her own mental state carefully over the next few days. She called her parents to let them know that she was safe and to provide them with a brief account of what had happened. Her father, a retired police detective, was proud of how she had handled the situation, but concerned about the potential media attention. Her mother was simply relieved that Maya was unharmed and that the threats had been neutralized without anyone being permanently injured. "Your training was expensive, but it sounds like it was worth every penny," her father said. "You did exactly what you should have done. You tried to de-escalate, you defended yourself appropriately, and you showed restraint when the threats were neutralized." Her mother was more emotional in her response. "I've been worried about this new career of yours, but knowing that you can protect yourself like this makes me feel better about you traveling to dangerous places around the world." After talking with her parents, Maya called her training coordinator at the contractor certification program to report the incident. This was required protocol for any graduate who was involved in a real-world application of their training within the first year after certification. The coordinator, a former Delta Force operator named Mike Stevens, was impressed with Maya's account of the incident and her handling of both the tactical and legal aspects. 5 against 1, with weapons involved, and you neutralized all threats without any permanent injuries or legal complications, he summarized. "That's exactly the kind of performance we hope to see from our graduates." Mike also provided some valuable perspective on the career implications of the incident. "Aegis is gonna love this," he told her. "Real-world experience is incredibly valuable in our industry, and the fact that you handled it professionally will actually enhance your credentials rather than create problems." This was reassuring to Maya, who had been concerned that the public nature of the incident might complicate her upcoming employment. The private security industry valued discretion, but it also valued proven capability under pressure. That evening, Maya received a call from Elena, the former Marine instructor who had witnessed the incident. Elena was calling to check on Maya's emotional state and to offer some guidance about managing the aftermath of using violence in self-defense.
Even when you're completely justified,
Even when you have no choice, using violence against other people can have psychological consequences, Elena explained. Some people experience delayed stress reactions, guilt, or even nightmares. It's important to monitor your emotional state and seek professional support if needed. Maya appreciated Elena's concern and professional guidance. She was already noticing some unusual emotional fluctuations, periods of confidence and satisfaction alternating with moments of doubt and anxiety about whether she had handled the situation optimally. The what-if thinking is normal, Elena assured her. You'll probably replay the incident multiple times, considering different approaches or wondering if you could have de-escalated more effectively. That's a healthy part of processing the experience, as long as it doesn't become obsessive. Elena also provided some practical advice about dealing with potential media attention and legal follow-up. Don't talk to reporters without consulting with a lawyer first, she advised, and be prepared for the possibility that Brad and his friends might try to portray themselves as victims or claim that you used excessive force. This possibility had occurred to Maya, particularly given the serious nature of Brad's injuries and the fact that the incident had been recorded by multiple witnesses. Even though she was confident that her actions had been justified, she knew that public perception and legal reality didn't always align. Maya spent the evening reviewing her own mental state and physical condition. The adrenaline from the incident had long since faded, leaving her feeling emotionally drained but physically alert. Her body showed no signs of injury from the confrontation, which was a testament to both her training and the effectiveness of her tactical approach. She also spent time researching the legal implications of self-defense cases involving trained martial artists. What she found was generally encouraging. Courts typically recognize that trained individuals still have the right to defend themselves, as long as they used appropriate force and didn't escalate beyond what was necessary to neutralize threats. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself reflecting on how the incident would influence her future career and personal development. She had originally chosen private security work because it offered the opportunity to travel, work with interesting clients, and apply her skills in challenging environments. The beach incident had demonstrated that those challenges might arise unexpectedly, even during personal time. But Maya also realized that the incident had given her something invaluable: confidence in her ability to handle real-world threats effectively and professionally. During her upcoming assignments with Aegis International, she would be able to draw on actual combat experience rather than just training scenarios. The psychological impact was complex, but ultimately positive. Maya felt a sense of empowerment and validation that her training had not provided. She had faced a genuine threat and had emerged victorious without compromising her values or using excessive force. The experience had confirmed that her career choice was appropriate and that she had the skills and temperament needed for success in high-risk environments. As she prepared for bed, Maya made a decision about how to frame the incident in her own mind. Rather than seeing it as a violent disruption of her vacation, she would consider it a successful field test of her training and a valuable preparation for her upcoming professional responsibilities. The 5 young men who had approached her on the beach had intended to victimize her, but instead they had provided her with confirmation that she was ready for the challenges that lay ahead in her new career. Their attempt to intimidate and assault her had backfired spectacularly, leaving them with injuries, legal problems, and the knowledge that not every woman was as helpless as they had assumed. Maya realized that the incident would become a defining story in her personal and professional narrative, the moment when she transitioned from trained student to proven operator. It would inform her confidence, her tactical decision-making, and her understanding of her own capabilities for years to come. As she finally fell asleep, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. She had faced a test that she hadn't expected or sought, but she had passed it with honor and effectiveness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight she could rest with the knowledge that she was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks after the beach incident, Maya was sitting in the executive conference room of Aegis International's headquarters in Virginia, facing a panel of senior partners who would determine her first assignment. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Potomac River, but Maya's attention was focused entirely on the 3 individuals who held her professional future in their hands. The incident at Sunset Beach had indeed become part of her professional narrative, but in ways she hadn't entirely anticipated. Word of her successful defense against multiple attackers had spread through the private security community with remarkable speed, creating a reputation that preceded her into every professional interaction. "Ms. Chen," said Victoria Hartwell, Aegis International's managing partner and a former CIA operations officer, "we've reviewed the police reports from your beach incident, along with witness statements from Colonel Patterson and Sergeant Vasquez. We've also received a detailed assessment from your training coordinator at the Contractor Certification Program." Maya nodded respectfully, maintaining the composed professional demeanor that had become second nature during her months of training. She had spent the past 3 weeks preparing for this moment, but she still felt a flutter of nervous energy about how her first real-world application of combat skills would be perceived by potential employers. "The technical aspects of your response were exemplary," continued Robert Chen, the company's head of tactical operations, and no relation despite sharing Maya's surname. 5 opponents, weapons involved, civilian environment, multiple witnesses. You handled every aspect professionally while maintaining appropriate force levels and legal compliance. The third panel member, Dr. Sarah Kim, served as Aegis International's Psychological Services Director. "What impressed us most," she added, "was your post-incident behavior, proactive cooperation with law enforcement, appropriate psychological processing, and maintaining operational security despite media pressure. These are indicators of the kind of maturity and judgment we require in our operators." Maya felt a wave of relief at the positive assessment. She had spent sleepless nights worried that the public nature of the incident might disqualify her from the type of discreet, high-profile assignments that represented the pinnacle of private security work. "However," Victoria continued, "we need to discuss how this incident affects your deployment options. Your face and techniques are now part of the public record, with multiple cell phone videos circulating on social media platforms. This creates both opportunities and limitations for your career trajectory." This was the conversation Maya had been dreading. The beach confrontation had been recorded by several witnesses, and despite her attempts to maintain a low profile, the videos had gained significant online attention. The footage clearly showed her martial arts techniques and tactical decision-making, which could compromise her effectiveness in certain types of covert operations. "The positive aspect," Robert explained, "is that your demonstrated capabilities make you extremely valuable for high-visibility protection assignments. Clients who want their security presence to serve as both protection and deterrent would consider you ideal for their needs." Dr. Kim added her perspective. "Your psychological profile suggests that you would excel in assignments requiring interaction with high-profile clients who appreciate competent professional security personnel. Many of our clients, particularly successful women in business or entertainment, prefer female operators who can blend into their social environments while providing superior protection capabilities." Victoria leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. "We have a specific assignment in mind for you, Ms. Chen. One of our most prestigious clients, I can't provide details until you accept, has requested a female operator with demonstrated real-world experience for a 6-month protection detail. The assignment involves international travel, social events, and potential high-risk environments." Maya's heart rate increased slightly at the prospect of her first major assignment. This was exactly the type of opportunity she had envisioned when she committed to the military contractor training program: challenging, international, and involving the protection of someone whose work or status made them a target for sophisticated threats.
The compensation package reflects both the assignment's importance and your unique qualifications, Robert added, sliding a folder across the conference table. Base salary, hazard pay, travel allowances, and performance bonuses. Full benefits including medical coverage that extends to combat-related injuries, life insurance, and professional development opportunities. Maya opened the folder and reviewed the financial terms, trying to maintain her composure despite the impressive numbers. The compensation was significantly higher than she had expected for her first assignment, reflecting both the industry's recognition of her capabilities and the premium that Aegis International could command from clients seeking the best available protection. "What can you tell me about the threat assessment?" Maya asked, focusing on the operational rather than financial aspects of the assignment. Victoria smiled approvingly at Maya's priorities. The client operates in multiple countries where kidnapping and assassination attempts against high-profile Americans are ongoing concerns. Previous incidents have involved both opportunistic criminals and organized groups with political motivations. Your job would be close personal protection, advanced security for travel and events, and coordination with local security assets. Dr. Kim added her perspective. The psychological demands will be significant. Extended periods of hypervigilance, cultural adaptation challenges, and the stress of protecting someone whose decisions you cannot control. Your performance during the beach incident suggests you have the emotional regulation and tactical flexibility required for this type of assignment.
Maya considered the opportunity carefully. This was exactly the type of work she had trained for, but the transition from defending herself against drunk college students to protecting a high-value target from international threats was substantial. However, her confidence had been significantly boosted by her successful handling of the beach confrontation. "I'm interested in the assignment," Maya replied. "When would it begin, and what kind of preparation time would I have?" 2 weeks, Victoria answered. "You'll spend the first week here at headquarters working with our tactical team to develop operation-specific skills and protocols. The second week will be spent with the client, learning their routines, preferences, and specific security requirements." Robert pulled out another folder containing what appeared to be training schedules and assignment briefings. "You'll be working with some of our most experienced operators during the preparation phase. Your beach incident has actually opened some doors. Several of our senior people specifically requested to work with you based on your demonstrated capabilities." Maya realized that the beach confrontation, which she had initially seen as a potential career obstacle, had instead become a professional asset that distinguished her from other newly certified operators. Her ability to handle real-world violence professionally and effectively was exactly what separated theoretical training from practical capability. "There is one additional consideration," Dr. Kim mentioned. "The media attention from your beach incident will fade over time, but for the next several months, you may face recognition or attention that could complicate certain types of assignments. We factored this into our client matching process, focusing on situations where your public profile could actually be advantageous rather than problematic." Maya nodded her understanding. She had already experienced some of the consequences of viral video fame, including interview requests from martial arts publications and offers to endorse self-defense products. While she had declined these opportunities to maintain her professional focus, they demonstrated the ongoing public interest in her story. "What's the client's background?" Maya asked. "Understanding their professional activities and personal interests will help me prepare more effectively." Victoria's expression became more guarded. "I can tell you that the client is a successful entrepreneur whose business interests have attracted both legitimate threats and public attention that increases their security requirements. The details of their identity and specific activities will be provided after you accept the assignment and complete the security clearance process." This was standard protocol in the private security industry, where client confidentiality was paramount and operational security required limiting access to sensitive information. Maya had expected this level of compartmentalization and was prepared for the gradual revelation of assignment details as her clearance and need-to-know status developed. Maya took a deep breath and made her decision. "I accept the assignment." The 3 panel members exchanged satisfied glances, and Victoria extended her hand in congratulations.
Welcome to Aegis International, Miss Chen. Your first assignment begins Monday morning with tactical preparation and client briefings. As Maya left the conference room with her assignment documents and security protocols, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that afternoon at Sunset Beach. What had begun as a relaxing vacation had become a defining moment that shaped her professional trajectory and personal confidence. The 5 young men who had approached her that day with predatory intentions had unknowingly provided her with the real-world validation that no training scenario could replicate. Their attempt to victimize her had instead launched her into a career protecting others from similar threats around the world. Maya realized that her story was just beginning. The beach incident had been her introduction to the realities of using violence in self-defense, but her upcoming assignment with Aegis International would test her abilities in ways that were both more complex and more consequential. She would be responsible not just for her own safety, but for protecting someone whose life and work made them targets of sophisticated threats. As she drove away from Aegis International headquarters toward her apartment to begin preparations for her new career, Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation. She had transformed herself from a college graduate with theoretical knowledge into a proven operator with real-world experience and professional opportunities. The 5 boys who had surrounded her at the beach had intended to turn her vacation into a nightmare. Instead, they had provided her with the experience and confidence that would define her success in a challenging and rewarding career. Their failure had become her triumph, and their attempt to intimidate her had instead empowered her to protect others from similar threats. Maya's training had prepared her for this moment, but the beach incident had proven she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new assignments, new threats, and new opportunities to apply her skills in defense of those who needed protection. She was no longer just someone who had learned to fight. She was someone who had proven she could win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.